Welcome back, everyone, to the Mental Health Entrepreneur Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking with Chris McDonald, who is a mental health professional who integrates yoga into her practice. She is also an author and podcast host of Yoga in the Therapy Room. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me. I've been enjoying your podcast.
Amazing. Thanks for being here. Well, let's
Absolutely.
go ahead and dive in. You are clearly an innovator, and I love that
Oh,
about
thank you.
you. Yeah. So tell me more about how you got interested in kind of going beyond talk therapy, because I know we all get trained in graduate school in that
Yes.
talk therapy modality. So how did that start to shift for you?
It's been a process and kind of a slow process. It's not like one day I woke up and say, "Hey, I want to integrate yoga." Not it didn't go that way. So long time ago when I went to grad school, of course we didn't learn much. In 1995 I graduated and we
Hmm.
didn't learn much about holistic modalities at all. So I jumped in as a school counselor. I was a school counselor for 16 years. So
Okay.
that's where I started. And I noticed with students I'd work with that just talking with them was helpful, but I had a lot of repeat offenders who would come see me all the time.
Hmm.
So those kids, I was like, they need something more. So I started to teach breathwork. So I had learned some breathwork techniques, and this was back before we had YouTube and all these handy dandy resources and podcasts. So I actually got a book and learned on my own
Mm.
and studied on my own and
Hmm.
practiced on my own and taught it to some kids with amazing results. I had a lot of kids with anxiety, especially school anxiety. And this became a tool that was so helpful for so many that was much more effective than just talk therapy. Not that there's anything wrong with traditional therapy,
Hmm.
but a lot of people need something more, is what I found over the years. And as I moved to licensure and when I was in the school system, I found I would hit a CBT wall
Hmm.
and that we could only go so far. And a lot of clients, and I worked a lot of kids then too, were just kind of stuck. Like, how do we move past this? And what I found then too was breath work wasn't enough for some
Hmm.
people. We have to
Hmm.
get more of the
Yeah.
body involved. So I learned more about somatic practices. And I actually met a roommate who she shared a space with me for therapy, and she talked about bringing yoga into session and giving it as homework. And I stepped back. I was like, "Whoa, this is so cool! I want to be able
Hmm.
to do that." So it kind of that was like a little bit of a seed back in 2016. It's like,
Okay.
this sounds really cool. So then I started to take some yoga, which was called subtle yoga with Christine Weber in Asheville, North Carolina. And that kind of got me rolling with this and ended up certified in 2019. This was not the path I thought I was going to take
Hmm.
at all.
Hmm.
And I just integrated all of it and just loved it so much. So that's kind of where I went, just moving from traditional to gradually learning. And also, I left out meditation. So I did learn meditation as
Hmm.
well, learned some Buddhist techniques, did my training, and went to some local Buddhist places where we did, a weekly meeting, Sangha, we call that, and talked about Dharma, different teachings, and practiced meditation. And they really focused on creating our own daily practice as well. And I do that
Hmm.
with yoga as well, too.
Okay, great. So
Yeah.
what was it about yoga and maybe meditation, maybe it's the same, maybe it's slightly different, that really seemed to feel like it was the missing piece or the part that made the difference for you?
Well, I know you mentioned before we hit record about sharing other things outside of, what we do and as a professional, but yoga is me outside of therapy and professional. It's personal
Mm.
and professional for me. So
Yeah.
I have created a daily yoga and meditation practice and incorporate all these practices myself and pranayama. We call that pranayama and yoga is breath work. So using that has helped me to better help my nervous system to stay in a
Mhm.
calmer space. Because when I worked in the school system, just to rewind a second, I
Yeah.
got very stressed out.
Mhm.
And I would start the day, alarm goes off, run all day long. And I
Mhm.
was probably in that sympathetic state in the nervous system more
Right.
often. I didn't understand it as well when I was doing this. And when you're a school counselor, it is very difficult. You're thrown into lots of roles and just juggling, juggling, juggling more than you can ever imagine. And it had a consequence. I was having migraines like 3 times a week. I would be at the
Hmm.
doctor a lot. Well, especially working with children, you're have unfortunately a lot more
Yep.
germs but I mean, I was sick a lot. And
Mm,
since, I've been able to incorporate this pretty much daily since 2016, 2017 ish, that I've really been able to be much more in a healthy space, been able to better take care of myself. And that's what I promote with clients as well, to be able to create their own personal practice if they want.
mhm.
And, but then they see the results and they're just like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Because it helps all of us, the holistic part of all of us, mind, body,
Right.
and spirit.
And I love that you mentioned that because I think you're right. Yoga and meditation can certainly be integrated into therapy. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what that looks like.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it also can be something that anyone can do and create their own practice even outside of the therapy room. So let's start in
Yeah.
therapy. And
Mhm.
what do you do? What does this look like to integrate it into a therapy session?
So when I get a new client, I talk about yoga and what it is and the type of yoga I do. So listeners may be thinking of yoga as Instagram when people do contortionist kind of poses.
Hmm.
That is not all what yoga is about. Just
Yeah.
gonna clarify that.
That's good clarification.
And it's not fit yoga. I don't teach fit yoga because I have back issues and I can't do a lot of that.
Mm,
Super fast yoga. Oh, I mean, it's good. It's got a point for cardio, but for me, it's all about slow, mindful movement,
mm,
connecting to the body, somatic practices. There's so much that we can bring in the therapy room as therapists to really help with healing. And I know you mentioned that you also treat trauma. So it is just perfect for helping with trauma as well. So there's lots of different ways. So once clients understand what I teach, then part of this is informed consent. So it is in my paperwork as far as informed consent. There's always consent every time we do it in session, no matter how many times I've seen a client. How would this feel for you today if
mhm,
we did a little bit of movement or breath or meditation? And if they say no, then we do something else. Where would you like to go today? So, of course, it's always about choice and keeping it trauma informed, meaning that they always have the choice.
yeah.
With trauma, they don't have the choice. So, this helps them to empower themselves to create the session the way they want it to go. And I do ask some clients if they want to start with yoga to begin the session. Before we even get going, do you want to do some grounding?
Hmm.
Would you like to do some breath work to start each time? Sure. Some people, they're really like that. Other people don't. We might do it in the middle. Sometimes it's organic. Like I've had clients come
Mhm.
in that are just restless and can't sit still, and they'll tell me they'll actually be moving around in session. And I'll be like, can we pause for a moment? Would it be okay if we did some practices to kind of move through some of that anxious energy? And they're like, yes, please. And then by the time we are
Mhm.
done and we have a seat again, then they're much calmer, more focused. We can focus on the issue. Maybe get to brains. I also use brain spotting. Maybe get to brain spotting at that point. Or we might end it. So there's lots of different ways to integrate yoga into sessions. So
Mhm.
I might say, hey, we have 10 minutes left. How would it feel to do some movement or meditation at the end? Or
Mhm.
and sometimes clients bring it up too. They'll be like, can we do that yoga thing where
Oh,
you bring your
yeah.
arm up?
Mhm.
Which is great. I love for them to, and I tell them I am try to empower them. You're welcome to ask for what you need in this session
Mhm.
anytime with me. So
Yeah.
there's so many different ways we can bring this in. But sometimes we just can do awareness. And a lot of therapists listening may be like, I can't do yoga with clients. Yes, you can, and you probably already are. So if you tell clients to be aware, I'm noticing their body. What do you notice as you talk about this in your body? That's yoga. That's awareness.
Hmm.
Keeping it that simple.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that you clarified that this doesn't mean we have to like clear a big space and get our mats
No, not at
out and
all.
do
No.
down dog and all of those different
And be
yoga
in workout
poses,
clothes or
right? Right? Yeah, I think that's, and I know like I've
yeah.
seen like
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
chair yoga, there's breathing, there's all kinds of movements that can be done in dress clothes even and if needed, right?
Especially because I'm not teaching like super hard poses. We're doing the
Right.
think of simplifying all this down to where
Mm-hmm.
it's easy, even if it's inhale, bringing our arms up, Exhale,
Hmm.
bringing arms down. And think
Right.
about that. That's still getting people in their bodies.
Definitely.
And I do it with
Definitely.
them, by the way, for those that, because we can't just tell clients to, to do these practices and not do it with them.
Oh, what a great clarification.
Yes.
Right? That would feel
Mhm.
very awkward to
If
someone,
you're
I
like,
think.
okay, put your arms up, I'm not going to show you. So this is
Right.
a collaborative process.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I like that. And what has gotten you so passionate about it? I know it's kind of the direction that you're moving in, right?
absolutely.
Clinically. So, what is it about doing this that really inspires you?
I think because I've seen the positive result on my nervous system and my health
Yeah.
overall, I'm just less reactive. I'm able to stay calmer. My anxiety is there, but it's never as bad as it was. It does come up at times, but much more in my window of tolerance.
Hmm.
So I'm not taking out of that as often. It takes a lot more to get me riled up. But just knowing that, and I've seen the results with clients that
Yeah.
they are able to move through with all the modalities I use so much quicker. It's so much more effective, makes my sessions so much more. And you know why clients love it? Because it's tools they can use
Hmm.
at home. So I assign it as homework. So this is integrated in their personal life too. Because most people that see me are interested in holistic modalities and yoga. So they're pretty open to using that. And some that aren't, they're just like, okay, I'll give it a try. And
Hmm.
I've had many converts,
I bet.
especially male clients are usually more hesitant. But the ones that I've taught, they're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And they can see those practices. And since I started the Holistic Counseling podcast, which is the podcast I'm rebranding to Yoga in the Therapy Room, my listeners, that was the number one thing. I've done focus groups and I
Hmm.
have a Facebook group for them. And that's the number one thing they want to learn. How do I integrate yoga into clinical sessions? How do you do
Hmm.
this? So,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
So that's going to be the focus of this new podcast.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. I definitely want to talk about your podcast journey, but first I want to circle back to
Yeah.
what about yoga for people that are not in therapy? And I know you have a book about self-care practices. I
Yes.
imagine there's some yoga in there.
Of course.
How did I guess?
The second
Um,
book is yes.
yeah. So, what would you suggest for people that are like, hey, I would just love to add some things to my toolbox. I don't know if I'm ready to go into the therapy room. Do you have thoughts on that?
The first step too is to create your own practice.
Hmm.
In my opinion, you cannot teach yoga unless you're doing yoga.
Oh, for sure.
You have to embody these practices because people will know that you're not doing them. If you're not really into your body fully, they'll know. And you're not, it's not going to have the same impact, I think.
Hmm.
Because I do have clients be like, how do you integrate into your daily life? This is what I'll tell them. But what are you going to say if you're not doing these practices, but you're like, here, do this as homework? I'm not going to do it, but you go ahead.
Yeah.
It's just not the same
And what
genuineness.
about people that are not therapists, but just
Yeah,
want
yeah,
to start integrating some wellness and meditation or yoga into
sure.
their lives? Do you have recommendations for that?
Yeah, just start small. 'Cause I think some people think I have to do a 90-minute yoga class. No, you don't. You can start even just doing 10 minutes, 15 minutes in the morning. So picking a time of day that works for you. Some people like to do it before bed even, just
Hmm.
even doing child's pose. Start with one pose if it's hard to motivate yourself and see how that feels and then continue moving on. We have YouTube now too if you want to do short practices. And
Hmm.
I always tell people to make sure you're looking at beginner if you've never done yoga before.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
because if you go to a community like a gym, you're going to probably have fit yoga, which is
Hmm.
fine. But think about what is the intention for you? Do you want to use this as a self care practice just for physical, or do you want the mental emotional benefit?
Hmm.
So if you want that, then you probably want a slower practice, a slow flow yoga, a yin yoga, something that's going to slow you down. Because most of us are moving too fast and we
Hmm.
don't take time for ourselves to slow down and connect to the
It's
body.
true. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. So, is your self-care book, I love that you kind of focus on things that are very actionable and like actually
Yes.
skills, right? So how did you get inspired to write that?
So the first book I wrote, Self Care for the Counselor, was in 2017. Um, I always had wanted to be a writer. And then I
Mm,
became a therapist counselor. Uh, but then I was like, how can I use these skills? Because what I just determined was like, wow, I've really been able to do some self care practices and talking to other therapists, they have struggled. A lot of therapists out there really have a difficult time. And most people, even if you're not in the therapy field,
mhm,
with how do I do a daily practice? And a preventative practice. That's more of what I promote too. Because, yeah, we can wait till we're stressed and we're at a 8 or 9 on that scale of 1 to 10. If 10's the worst as far as
mm,
anxiousness or stress, but then it's going to be much more difficult to calm ourselves. But if we can put these preventions in place by putting these in these times or whatever you want to do as far as your routine goes, then it's going to help you build that inner resilience to find that calm. The more
yeah,
consistent we can be, you are changing your brain. You
mhm,
are rewiring your brain towards more calm resilience. And these routines, your brain's going to want to go there in the morning or whenever you do it during your day.
mhm.
It's going to make such an impact on you.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely for me. That's my morning. I have a workout and then a little yoga
Yeah.
and little meditation. And the days that I don't do that are just
Yes,
not
you
the
know.
same.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
It's yeah, once you can really get into more of that calm space too, it's just
Mhm,
really powerful. And that can be your motivation for those that want to do this. But I wanted to reach other people that were struggling with creating these routines because I talk a lot
mhm,
about self care routines. Also, the whole part of everybody, like physical, as far as eating habits. I've always tried to eat more healthy, and I know that's a struggle for lots of people. So, in my second book, which is a workbook, that was one thing I talk about. That sleep
mhm.
hygiene is huge. That
Yeah.
impacts every part of us. So, I talk a lot about sleep too. So, there's just all these different pieces that make up all of us that we have to really address, but break it down into small steps.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do want to talk about your podcast journey too. So you have your podcast right now is
Yes.
about holistic therapy, right?
Yes. Mhm.
And then you're switching that. So can you
Yes.
talk a little bit about this journey? I'd love to hear
Ooh,
how
it's a
your
journey.
original podcast got started and then now the
Yeah.
transition for you.
So when I wrote the book too, I thought, what is the best way to get this out there? Because this was self-published, so it's really
Mm.
difficult when you self-publish to reach an audience. And I thought, what about a podcast? So I had this little seed planted, and I took a training on it, and it honestly took me a while to get the courage to get out here.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's hard to
Uh-huh.
as you know, to put yourself out there. But then I came up with the idea of the holistic counseling podcast because I had a different podcast that didn't work out. So
Mm.
there's a third podcast about burnout and helping people with that. But I realized I was missing the holistic part.
Mm.
And I really wanted to get that out there. And so I actually had a coach, Joe Sanak from Practice of the Practice. Um, Shout out to him because he helped me come up with the name of the
Mm.
podcast and started that direction a
Okay,
while back.
cool.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Fantastic. And you've had a lot of episodes. I don't even know how many, in the hundreds of episodes, right?
190 something. Yeah,
Okay,
lost.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So you must be loving podcasting.
Yeah, yeah, it's going well. But I
Mm,
just make it part of my routine as well. So I created my whole private practice around the podcast and around my self care as well.
mhm.
So I have Mondays are my podcast day, and then Tuesday through Friday I see clients, and I
Okay.
make it all part of my routine. And
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm. That makes sense. And so what's inspiring the change to the new Yoga in the Therapy Room podcast?
So just to back up, so last fall,
Mm.
since I had so many listeners interested in integrating yoga, I created a course called Yoga Basics for Therapists: How to Integrate Yoga into Sessions effectively and safely, and
Hmm.
as well as ethically. And I did 2 pilot groups and one this spring. And I was like, okay, so people are really wanting this and they're so excited about this. And I had success with the people that took the course. So why not move the podcast in that direction? Because here's what happened. And
Mm,
I told you this too before we hit record is that, I let lots of different people on the show, which is great. People wanted to learn about different holistic modalities. But the problem is my numbers were dropping.
mm,
Listens were we can always see that as podcasters, how many people are
mhm,
listening. I mean, significant. I'm not saying like one or two people. I'm talking very significantly because I think it got too broad and it just was,
mm,
which is good, but then it's not so good from a business standpoint. I feel like that the direction was kind of lost and got muddled with all how many things we were focusing on. So I thought niching down would be in alignment with the course I want to be able to provide courses for therapists on how to integrate yoga into
mhm.
sessions and then, be able to support therapists on this journey as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So you've been in the process of switching that over, and when does that new
Yes.
one launch?
September 18th.
Oh, it's soon. So you've already probably recorded.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, are you
Yes.
bringing guests on, or is this mostly you teaching and giving tips and those kinds of things?
So it's going to be mostly solo episodes. I'm going to have yoga snacks once a month, which are a practice episode only, like a meditation or brief movement practice or somatic
Oh,
practice.
nice.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that'll be a short little blip. I say snack because it's going to be under 15 minutes is my goal, just to make it a little just like, oh, let me listen and try this
Hmm.
and learn about this. But I'm
Right.
also going to have some community engagement with the podcast as well. I'm hoping to get listeners on as and onto the show in different ways. More about
Hmm.
that later, but
Okay.
making this just not it's not just about me, of course. It's about the listeners. We wouldn't be here without them. So making them a part of things as well.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, to me, starting these podcasts, writing this book, and starting your practice, those are all entrepreneurial
Yes.
things
Hmm.
that you're doing. What has the entrepreneur journey been like for you? I always like to ask that question.
Yeah. So just to back up too, I was in the school system. I worked for the state. I had no entrepreneurial journey
Yeah,
before.
right?
So I realized what I don't want the rest of my life was to work for somebody else anymore, be told what to do, to be pigeonholed and have be so scattered in so many directions and have to work under so many people and so many opinions that I just said no
Hmm.
and I quit the school system June 13th, 2013. And yeah, as you can tell, I remember the day.
Yeah, it's an important day.
Um, but I couldn't do it anymore and it just got to be too much. So I decided to get my licensure and I did work for some agencies to start out and then I moved to my private practice and really wanted to do my own thing and blaze my own trail. So it's been kind of a process. Like I said, I never thought I'd be where I am. I never even imagined that I would be a podcaster for, this
Hmm,
is something I
right.
just really wanted to learn more about and give it a go. But I think that that's what it is, isn't it? We got to put things out there, see what works, see where we land, but know that we can shift. We can always rewrite our own story, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I think there's a very truism that if you're going to try to get it all perfect, you're never going to start.
No.
Right? You have to be willing to risk and willing to
Yes.
fail. And then it's just about getting back up and figuring it out from there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Amazing.
sure.
Well, we are almost out of time, but I would love to know from you, is there something that you really would like listeners to know? Either entrepreneurial advice, maybe self-care advice. What's kind of a one thing that you could leave people
Yeah.
with today?
Probably just to really listen to yourself so that
Mm,
I talk to clients and other therapists about really tuning into the inner wisdom, intuition, higher self, whatever you want to call it. We all have that little voice that can direct us. And if you're feeling unhappy where you are in your career, really listen to that. And it can be scary to make a change, but really think about dig deep, right? Can I dig deep into getting brave and to take this step forward so that maybe that you could land in a better place
mm,
because you don't have to stay where you are if it's really disrupting your life and causing a lot of stress. There are other options and opportunities out there.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, thank you for being on. I cannot wait to tune
Thanks.
into your new podcast.
Thank you.
Everyone listening, you can find information about Chris and her books and her current podcast, as well as the new one in our show notes. Thanks for being here.